In 1971, two small stone heads were dug up in the quiet English town of Hexham. They were crude, ancient-looking, and oddly lifelike, with wide eyes and strange smiles. The family who found them thought they were toys. Within days, things began to happen in that house that no one could explain. Doors opened by themselves. Objects moved. A creature was seen. And soon, the so-called Hexham Heads would become one of Britain's strangest modern legends. Hexham sits in northern England, a quiet market town built on centuries of Roman and Celtic history. Beneath its streets lie layers of ancient ruins, forgotten temples, and burial sites from long before modern times. In 1971, a family named Robeson lived in a modest home on Reed Avenue. The children, Colin and Leslie, were playing in the garden when they uncovered two small rounded stone heads buried in the soil. Each was roughly the size of a fist, carved crudely with human features, bulging eyes, flat noses, and eerie, tight smiles. At first, the boys treated them like curiosities. Their mother, Mrs. Robeson, put them on a shelf inside the house. But almost immediately, strange things began to happen in that house. Doors opened by themselves. Objects moved. A creature was seen. And soon, the so-called Hexham Heads would become one of Britain's strangest modern legends. Soon after the Robesons' discovery, the heads were examined by a man named Dr. Anne Ross, a Celtic historian at the University of Southampton. She was an authority on ancient pagan artifacts and believed the heads might date back to pre-Roman times, perhaps connected to Celtic fertility gods or ancient household spirits. Ross was fascinated. She took them home for study. That's when things took a darker turn. Within days of bringing the heads into her house, Dr. Ross and her family began experiencing the same phenomena the Robesons described. Footsteps at night, objects moving on their own. One morning, Ross woke up and saw a large half-human, half-animal figure, what she described as a hairy man-beast, standing in the hallway. It turned its head toward her, then vanished into thin air. Ross was shaken. She wrote in her notes that the apparition seemed aware, watchful, not malevolent, but deeply unsettling. Her daughter reported the same figure. The family eventually removed the heads from their home, believing them cursed or haunted. The story began to circulate across Britain, attracting journalists and paranormal researchers. The Hexham Heads became a media sensation. Were they ancient relics tied to pagan rituals, or simply the focus of a panic buy, a shared illusion sparked by suggestion? Then came a twist. In 1973, 2 years after the discovery, a man named Des Craigie came forward. He lived in the same neighborhood where the Robesons found the heads. He claimed he had made them himself in the 1950s as toys for his children. He said they were not ancient at all, just homemade crafts made of cement and sand. Craigie's story seemed to explain everything. But then more people came forward claiming that couldn't be true. The stone composition of the heads didn't fully match modern materials, and the surface wear suggested significant age. Even if Craigie's story was true, it didn't explain what happened in the homes where the heads had been. Multiple families reported disturbances that stopped once the heads were removed. A series of unexplained phenomena linked to two small, smiling stones.
There are several competing theories about what the Hexham Heads really were, and what caused the haunting that followed them. The first is the ancient artifact theory. Some archaeologists suggested the heads might be connected to Celtic house gods, small figurines meant to guard homes or tombs. Over time, the original meaning could have been lost, and the objects instead carried a sense of fear and reverence. The fact that both the Robsons and the Ross family experienced similar events might hint at some residual psychological or cultural energy, a kind of folk memory triggered by ancient symbols. The second theory is the psychokinetic theory, that the disturbances weren't caused by the heads themselves, but by the families. The idea is that emotional energy, fear, and suggestion can manifest as physical effects, moving objects, sounds, sensations. In this view, the heads acted as a psychological trigger, not a supernatural one. The third theory is the hoax theory. Supporters of Des Craggy's account argue that the heads were modern and the entire haunting grew from coincidence and media exaggeration. In the 1970s, British tabloids thrived on paranormal stories, especially after the rise of shows about ghosts and UFOs. Some believed the tale was amplified beyond recognition, turning a simple neighborhood curiosity into a full-blown myth. And then there's the strangest theory, the tulpa theory. A tulpa is a thought form, an idea so powerful it manifests in the real world. In this interpretation, the stories about the heads, the fear, the repeated retellings, all created an entity. The creature seen by multiple witnesses may have been a projection of belief itself, a myth that learned to walk. Today, the original Hexham Heads have vanished. After being passed between collectors and museums, they were lost sometime in the 1980s. Replicas exist, but the true artifacts, or creations, depending on what you believe, have never been recovered. The house where the Robsons once lived was renovated. The garden where the heads were found has long since been paved over. But locals still whisper about the story, about the nights when people heard scratching on the walls or saw a shadow that wasn't their own. Whether they were ancient pagan icons, simple crafts, or cursed objects that absorbed fear itself, the Hexham Heads remain a reminder of something timeless, the human urge to explain the unexplainable, and the thin line between archaeology and superstition. In the end, two small stones left behind a story much larger than themselves. The legend of the Hexham Heads lives on, somewhere between history and haunting, between stone and spirit.